module, today, we will be discussing assessment of nutritional status in dual nutrition burden era. What is dual nutrition burden? India and other developing countries are currently undergoing social, demographic, health and nutrition transitions. The term dual nutrition burden was coined in the 90s of the last centuries to denote a phase of the ongoing nutrition transition in the low and middle income countries characterized by persistent undernutrition mainly among poorer segments of population and emerging problem of overnutrition seen mostly among urban affluent segments. Experiences in the last 2 decades in India have shown that as the transition processes and progresses, both under and overnutrition are seen across all segments of population, both in urban and in rural areas. Concurrently, India is also undergoing a health transition and facing dual disease burden, that is, persistence of high morbidity due to communicable diseases and maternal and child health problems, and simultaneous increase in lifestyle and overnutrition related non-communicable diseases. Assessment of nutritional status during dual nutrition burden era will have to take all these into account. During the last 3 decades, Indian scientists have been in the forefront of global efforts exploring epidemiological, clinical, biochemical dimensions and health implications of dual nutrition burden. These studies have defined the magnitude of dual nutrition burden both in urban and in rural areas, in different states and among different segments of population in different socioeconomic groups. These studies have shown that undernutrition and overnutrition can be seen in the same family. That is, an under 5 child can be underweight, his mother normally nourished and grandmother overnourished. In the same individual at different periods of time, an undernourished mother can grow into an overnourished grandmother. In the same individual at the same time. This might sound somewhat paradoxical, but this can happen when different parameters are used for assessing nutritional status. For example, an underweight stunted child is undernourished, but the same child could be having a high BMI for age and height and therefore classified as overnourished. So, the same child simultaneously is both undernourished and overnourished. Indian studies have documented the transgenerational impact of dual nutrition burden and also that undernutrition in childhood may predispose to overnutrition during adult life. Indians have high adiposity for any given BMI, and this renders them more prone for cardiovascular disease, and that too at a younger age group. In this module, you will learn about dimensions and determinants of dual nutrition burden in India. What are the widely used parameters for assessment of nutritional status in the earlier era when undernutrition was the major problem? What are the additional parameters which have been included in the last 3 decades with the emergence of dual nutrition burden? Why has this change occurred? And how will these added parameters help us in prevention, early detection and effective management of under and overnutrition in the dual nutrition burden era?
In this segment, we will now review the nutrition transition that has been happening in India in the last 7 decades. 70 years ago, India became independent. At that time, the country was not self-sufficient in food grain production. Over 80% of Indians were poor and food insecure. The country faced two major nutritional problems. One was the threat of famine and resultant acute starvation due to low food production and lack of an appropriate food distribution system. The other was prevalence of macro and micronutrient deficiencies due to low dietary intake because of poverty and low purchasing power, high prevalence of infection because of poor access to safe drinking water and poor sanitation, lack of healthcare facilities and poor utilization of even available facilities due to low literacy and lack of awareness further contributed to the problem. Famine and starvations hit the headlines because they were acute, localized and caused profound suffering and fatality. However, chronic low food intake was very widespread but silent and led to undernutrition and many more deaths and starvation. When we overcame food insecurity at the national level due to Green Revolution and became self-sufficient in food production in the 70s, the nutrition and health status of Indians were reviewed. We found that over 70% of India's population were still poor. They spent over 70% of their income on food, and despite this expenditure, over 70% were undernourished. Access to essential health care was low because the country did not have a primary health care system either in urban or in rural areas. As a result, morbidity and mortality rates were very high. It was quite clear that mere self-sufficiency in food grain production by itself will not improve household food security or nutritional status of individuals. There was a need to build up a better access to subsidized food grains, nutrition, health and family welfare services. Access to health care for treatment of morbidity was needed to improve nutritional status in children. The country therefore embarked on multi-pronged interventions for improving food security on one hand and nutritional status of its citizens on the other. To improve national food security, investments were made to improve food production so that it meets the needs of growing population. Efforts were also made to build up the buffer stocks and to build up public distribution system. To improve household food security, the country embarked on programs to improve purchasing power through employment guarantee schemes. Simultaneously, there was investment in direct and indirect food subsidy. In addition to these, there were efforts to improve nutritional status of vulnerable groups such as preschool children, school children, pregnant women and lactating women through food supplementation programs. Healthcare for early detection and treatment of infection was also extended to these groups. How do we know all these work? How far they work? How much improvement has happened either in food security or in nutritional status? India built up an independent system for assessing and monitoring food security. How do we assess that? Through availability of food and food production monitored on an yearly basis through agricultural statistics. The National Sample Survey Organization undertook surveys to assess economic access to food, GDP growth, poverty rates, access to subsidized food through public distribution system, consumption expenditure on food, quantity of foodstuffs and macronutrients consumed by households. Assessment of nutritional status was the second major investment. Food and nutrient intakes of all the members of surveyed household were assessed by the National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau. Nutritional status as assessed by anthropometric indices such as height, weight and body mass index were taken up periodically by the National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau, by the National Family Health Survey, district level household survey and annual health survey. Prevalence of micronutrient deficiencies, especially anemia, vitamin A and iodine deficiency, were surveyed by NNMB, NFHS, DLHS and AHS. All these data were analyzed and used as inputs to national planning and also to assess progress in specific sectors, food security and nutritional status. Let's now review briefly the progress over the last 5 decades. Poverty alleviation, of course, comes first. Over the last 2 decades, India has been the second fastest growing economy in the world, and in the last decade, it became the fastest growing economy. There has been an accelerated decline in the number of poor persons, and India has achieved the Millennium Development Goal targets for poverty reduction well ahead of the time. There are some things which are very unique when we look at Indians and how they respond to a rise in their incomes. Over the world, any GDP rise as well as income of individuals is associated with an increased intake of energy rich food, consequent energy consumption and also a dietary diversification. But if we look at India, the increase in GDP growth and per capita income during the 90s and the first decade of 2000 was accompanied by a progressive reduction in energy consumption. Nor was there much dietary diversification, especially consumption of animal-based food. The average intake, however, still remains adequate to meet the energy requirements of the population because concurrently during these 3 decades, there has been a very steep reduction in physical activity in all domains. The reduction in physical energy intake might in fact have protected the Indians from a more sharper and rapid rise in overnutrition rates. Let's next look at the impact of poverty alleviation and subsidized food grain distribution through the PDS on the cereal intake of the families. In India, cereals are the major source of energy. Over the last 4 decades, there has been a decline in the cereal consumption and consequently also energy intake among the rich, some reduction among the middle class and an increase in cereal consumption among the poor. As of 2009-10, cereal intakes are essentially similar in all the 3 groups and is sufficient to meet their requirements. Can we state that perceptive Indians change their cereal intake, which is their main source of energy, even before the revision of RDA for Indians and took account of the fact that there has been a steep reduction in physical activity and therefore a reduction in their energy requirement. We can now clearly see one major reason for changes in nutritional status during nutrition transition in India is physical activity. In the 1960s, people in India undertook moderate physical activity in the work domain, domestic domain and transport domain. So, the fact that they spent very little time on discretionary activity and the fact that their discretionary activities were essentially sedentary did not matter. Overall physical activity in Indians were more than adequate for health and appropriate nutrition in the 60s. However, India in 2010 spends very little energy and increased mechanization of work, domestic and transport spheres have ensured that all these three spheres are today essentially sedentary activities. The time spent on discretionary activity has enormously increased but still remains totally sedentary. So, as a result of all these, over the last few decades, physical activity has declined and this is not compensated by an increase in discretionary moderate physical activity. What is all this doing to changes in nutritional status? As always, we start with the birth weight as a major indicator. Over the last 5 decades, there has not been any substantial reduction in low birth weight. Majority of Indian low birth weight babies are mature but small. Prevalence of preterm births is only about 12%. India still has the highest low birth weight rates in the world, but infant mortality rates in India are comparable to other developing countries. This is because the small but mature Indian low birth weight babies survive very well when given essential neonatal care. But these survivors grow along a lower trajectory as compared to normal birth weight babies. Dual nutrition burden actually begins right in utero. Low birth weight rate in India is about 30% and about 2% of Indian infants have high birth weight. Low maternal height, low pre-pregnancy weight, low maternal weight gain and anemia in pregnancy are major factors associated with low birth weight in India. This is transgenerational impact of maternal undernutrition leading to fetal growth retardation. Gestational diabetes with maternal overnutrition predisposes to large for date babies. This is transgenerational impact of maternal overnutrition. Pregnancy-induced hypertension with or without diabetes is emerging as an important obstetric factor predisposing to low birth weight. Effective antenatal care, including treatment for anemia, pregnancy-induced hypertension and food supplements when needed, can reduce low birth weight rate by about 5%. Indians' proneness for fat is very well known. When does it begin and what has been the time trends over the last 2 decades? Studies taken in hospital deliveries in Delhi clearly showed that Indian neonates are short and wasted, but that they have low muscle mass. Fat mass, however, is saved. In the last 2 decades, there has been no change in birth weight, but there has been an increase in fat fold thickness in neonates, in boys, in girls, in all gestational age groups, and in all birth weight categories. Clearly, Indians' proneness for adiposity begins in utero, and over the last 2 decades, there has been an increase in adiposity in Indian neonates. Delhi has a Delhi cohort of children in whom information on birth weight, growth across childhood, adolescence, and current nutritional status across adult life is available. 1/3 of the Delhi cohort children weighed less than 2.5 kg at birth. They had a mean birth weight of about 2.9 kg. They were undernourished during infancy and childhood and even early adolescence. But by the age of 30, majority of them were overweight. About half of them had BMI beyond 25 at 30 years. Central obesity, which is a much greater risk factor for metabolic disease and cardiovascular disease, was seen in 2/3 of men and about 1/3 of women. Impaired glucose tolerance and diabetes as well as hypertension was seen in 1/6 of these adults. At the earlier data on growth was available in all these adults, and analysis of that clearly showed that risk of hypertension and diabetes was higher in adults who as children had gained more weight and BMI. BMI is mainly body fat in childhood and adolescence. Clearly, childhood undernutrition may predispose to overnutrition in adult life and also predispose to hypertension. And we will next take up nutritional status of preschool children, changes over the last 5 decades. Let us then look at the time trends in prevalence of undernutrition in India using the data from National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau, which goes back to 1970. It's obvious that there has been a slow but steady decline in severe and moderate undernutrition as assessed by weight for age and height for age in preschool children. But wasting rates have remained unaltered. It has been generally assumed that reduction in stunting rates in preschool children will result in these children becoming taller adults. This, however, did not happen as has been shown by NNMB studies. This is because a change in prevalence of a group, that is those below -2 SD height for age, cannot result in an increase in average adult height spanning across different height ranges. We have some data on time trends and prevalence of undernutrition in India from National Family Health Surveys spanning the period between 1995 and 2015. Over the last 2 decades, these surveys show that there has been a slow but steady decline in stunting and underweight rate. Stunting rates had always been somewhat higher than the underweight rate, but they both share a similar slope of reduction. It's noteworthy that over decades there has been very little reduction in prevalence of wasting, which is generally acknowledged as a sign of current energy deficiency. In the dual nutrition burden era, it has become essential to focus on assessment of nutritional status using for BMI for age, because currently both undernutrition and overnutrition is a problem across age groups, and the stunted but appropriate weight for their height children get classified as underweight. On the other hand, stunted children who have appropriate weight and height for age should normally be classified as normal, and all those who have lower BMI for age classified as undernourished, and those who have higher BMI for age and height should be classified. Let us look at nutritional status of preschool children as assessed by height for age, weight for age and BMI for age. When height for age is used as the indicator for assessment of nutritional status, 48% of children are undernourished or stunted. 50.1% are normal and about 2% tall. When weight for age is used, 42.5% are undernourished, underweight, 57.1% normal and 0.4% overweight. The minute we change over to BMI for age, the picture differs radically. Only about 17% of children are undernourished and no less than 2% are overnourished. That is, they have high BMI for their age and height. What are the lessons that we learned from this? By improving dietary intake and treating infections, 1/6 of children who are undernourished can rapidly change to normal. That is, wasting can be rapidly reversed. About 2% of preschool children are overnourished. It's important to use BMI for assessing nutritional status because short children with high BMI may get misclassified as stunted and underweight. They have to be classified as overnourished and advised to become physically more active so that they can become normal. One of the major contributions that WHO has made to assessment of nutritional status of children and adolescents in the dual nutrition burden is the development of WHO Child Growth Standards and WHO Growth Standards for children and adolescents. Both these provide BMI for age standard for children. Using this BMI for age standard, children can broadly be classified as those with normal BMI, those with low BMI, and those with high BMI. Children of normal BMI can have normal height, can be short, or can be tall. As long as their BMI is normal, they do not require any nutritional intervention. Children with low BMI can have normal height, be tall or short. Irrespective of their current height and weight, they all require additional energy intake to ensure that their linear growth trajectory is not compromised. Children with high BMI can also be normal in height, be tall or short. All of them require adequate physical activity to reach normal BMI. Nutritional status of school-age children is also a very important component which has to be assessed right through different periods of nutrition transition. When we look at dietary intake and compare it with the recommended dietary allowances for Indian children, you can clearly see that the gap between energy requirement needed for growth and actual energy intake increases with increasing age of the child and is highest in the school age boys and girls. As a result, undernutrition rates increase during this period. However, there is one another factor that has to be taken into account when we are trying to assess what is happening to school age children in the last 2 decades. Increasing consumption of energy dense snacks, increasing time spent on TV watching or computer games have resulted in substantial reduction in physical activity and play. These are some of the major factors responsible for emerging problem of overnutrition in children and adolescents, especially in the urban affluent families. Nutrition and health education to combat these can prevent further escalation of overnutrition and may at a later date even reverse this trend. The current slide shows time trends in height, weight and BMI of children, girls and boys in the 10 to 17 years. Over the last 2 decades, there has been very little increase in height, but there has been some increase in weight. As a result, there has been substantial increase in BMI right through the 0 to 18-year age group. This increase in BMI is mainly due to an increase in body fat and is not due to increase in muscle mass. We also have data on adiposity in children and adolescents. We all know that there has been an increase in overweight and adiposity in school-age children, both in urban and rural areas, certainly much more among the affluent segments of population. Data from Indian adolescents from urban high-income group on body fat using bioelectrical impedance analysis have shown that they do have a very high fat mass. Comparison of percentage of fat in Delhi urban high-income group adolescent boys with non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black and Mexican Americans showed that percentage body fat was highest in Indian boys. Adiposity in adolescents is associated with adiposity in adults and increased risk of cardiovascular. We will next consider nutritional status of adults. Energy requirements in adults, especially sedentary adults, is mainly influenced by their body weight. Indian men and women are short. Average weight of an Indian woman is 46 kg and average weight of men in India is 51 kg. Therefore, their current energy requirements when they are sedentary is 1900 for men and 1450 for women. Energy requirements of sedentary Indians are thus low and are currently being fully met by the average energy intake. What happens when there is a slight difference between energy intake and energy requirements on the positive side? This data shows that over a period of 3 age groups, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, there has been a progressive increase in body weight and BMI of women. The difference in the between energy intake and energy expenditure is quite small, only between 75 and 100 kilocalories a day. This positive energy balance of 100 kilocalories leads to a progressive increase in body weight over a decade. This then is also the major factor responsible for increase in adiposity and increased cardiovascular disease risk. Data from National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau gives us some idea about time trends in mean height of women and of course men. Increase in mean height of women over 3 decades between 1975 and 2000-2001 was less than 3 centimeters. Inter-income group and interstate differences in height of Indian women is almost double this, 5 to 6 centimeters. We have to accept the fact that Indian women at 151 centimeter average height are shorter than the NCHS women whose average height is 164 centimeters by 13 centimeters. This gap cannot be rapidly bridged. What has happened to these women in terms of body weight? Mean body weight is always lowest in the under 25 age group. This is the time when majority of women have first or their second child. So, high undernutrition in women is associated with high low birth weight rate. After 30 and certainly between mid 40s, there is an increase in mean body weight of women. Inter-income group and interstate differences also exist. These differences are between 5 to 12 kg. We have to understand that Indian women are lighter than NCHS women by about 15 kilograms. This is partly due to lower height and partly due to the lower BMI, especially in younger women. Data on time trends in fat fold thickness in women from National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau surveys is shown in this slide. There has been an increase in mean fat fold thickness in women over the last 4 decades. It is lowest less than 0.5 millimeter in young women and highest more than 2.5 millimeters in women in the age group 45 to 55. There is an inter-income group and interstate differences which is about 2 millimeters. Adiposity is the major factor responsible for rising non-communicable disease burden. Indian research studies have always shown that for the same BMI, Indians have greater adiposity and lower muscle mass and therefore incur a much higher cardiovascular disease risk. For adults, BMI has long been used as the indicator for assessment of both under and overnutrition. WHO has recommended that adults with BMI less than 18.5 should be classified as undernourished. Those with BMI between 18.5 and 24.9 classified as normal. Those with BMI between 25 and 29.9 should be classified as overnourished, and those with BMI 30 or above should be classified as obese. Indians have a higher body fat for any given BMI as compared to Caucasians, and the increase in CVD risk occurs even before BMI of 25 is reached. It has therefore been suggested that Indians with BMI 23 or more should be classified as overweight and those with BMI 27 or above as obese. However, currently all national surveys continue to use BMI of 25 for classifying adults as overnourished. Over the last 2 decades, there has been a shift to the right in the distribution of BMI both in men and in women. BMI in women in NFHS 3, that is 2005-06, in comparison with DLHS 4, which was undertaken in 2013-14, and BMI in NFHS 3 in comparison to AHS, which was undertaken in 14-15, is shown in the pictures above. It's very clear that while undernutrition is still common, overnutrition is becoming a major problem. A similar trend is seen in men too. Measuring height and weight and computing BMI is therefore essential for assessing nutritional status of the adults. Effect of age on nutritional status of women is quite well marked. Most women complete childbearing by 30 years of age. Undernutrition in women is higher in this age group and is associated with high low birth weight rates in the offspring. Overnutrition rates are high in women beyond 40 years of age, and overnutrition rates in women across ages is higher than overnutrition rates in women. Women tend to ignore such weight gain because they believe that it is menopause related. They do not seek any nutrition or health advice and therefore incur the risk of non-communicable diseases and complications associated with non-communicable diseases. Surveys done in 2014 and 15 confirm that among the elderly, men and women, both under and overnutrition are public health problems. Undernutrition rates are higher in central and northern states. Overnutrition rates are higher in southern and western states. Let us now finally look at assessment of nutritional status in dual nutrition burden era. Why has it become even more important than earlier to accurately assess nutritional status? It is so because we now need information both at the individual level and at the community level. At the individual level, early detection of under and overnutrition in person, not in terms of communities or households, has become essential prerequisite for appropriate management. Initiation of appropriate management on the basis of findings in the individual during the assessment and monitoring the improvement in the nutritional status of the individual over time are essential now. In the community surveys, we need accurate assessment of nutritional status, first of all to assess magnitude and determinants of dual nutrition burden in different states of the country, and also to assess impact of ongoing public health interventions to combat dual nutrition burden in different states. When undernutrition was the major problem, parameters used for assessment of nutritional status were household food security assessment, dietary intake using 24-hour dietary recall to find out how insecure are the family members in terms of macro and micronutrient intake, clinical signs of nutritional deficiency because those were common in those days. Finally, anthropometric measurements, mainly measurement of weight and wherever possible, especially in children, height. Additional parameters that have to be used today for assessment of nutritional status in the dual nutrition burden era are physical activity measurement, because this has been one of the critical determinants of the current rise in overnutrition, body mass index instead of weight or height as the indicator for nutritional status in childhood and in adults. And finally, in view of higher risk of non-communicable diseases, amount of body fat and its distribution across age groups. Measurements currently used for assessment of nutritional status are food and nutrient intake, that is, using food frequency questionnaire and 24-hour dietary recall to assess deficit or excess of dietary intake. Physical activity pattern using 24-hour physical activity questionnaire to assess adequacy of current physical activity level. Height, weight and computation of BMI to assess undernutrition and overnutrition using BMI. BMI for age will be used in children. Mid upper arm, waist and hip circumference and computation of waist-hip ratio to assess adiposity and its distribution. Fat fold thickness measurement using Harpenden caliper to assess adiposity and its distribution. Fat mass and its distribution using bioelectrical impedance analysis to assess again adiposity. And let's first take up food and nutrient intake. Dietary intake of individuals, families and communities vary depending on their socioeconomic status, dietary habits and customs. Food frequency questionnaires provide a relatively rapid and easy method of assessing food consumption patterns of families and also individuals. It also provides some idea about the meal and dietary patterns, specific foods avoided or preferred either by the family or by the individual. But food frequency questionnaires do not give any information about the quantity of foodstuffs consumed, and this is one of the major lacuna in use of this for assessment of nutritional status in dual nutrition burden era. While food frequency questionnaire alone cannot be of much use, when combined with dietary intake assessed using 24-hour dietary recall, it will provide very useful information on the food security status of the family and food and nutrient intake of individual members. Food frequency questionnaire and dietary intake assessed by 24-hour dietary recall will help in identifying factors responsible for under or overnutrition and also micronutrient deficiency. The slide gives you a proforma that is currently being used in our institution for assessment of household food security by using two different methods. First, by comparing food purchased over a week or a month or even a day to the family using per consumption unit as the unit for determination of adequacy. The other is food cooked in the last 24 hours, again taken as per consumption unit and used to assess food security. As you all know, the purchase unit based calculation is done by National Sample Survey Organization for assessment of food security, and food cooked on the previous day used by NNMB surveys for assessment of household food security. Both these can simultaneously be done and can validate the finding of one with the other. Today, when we are using 24-hour dietary recall survey, some newer factors have to be taken into account while using the data to compute individual dietary intake. Investigators in the current era have to inquire about food intake from outside sources in addition to home cooked food, which is shared by all members of the family. This is especially important in school-age children and working adults who may habitually consume a midday meal at school or at work site. It is essential also to probe and get information from individuals about frequency and quantity of consumption of snacks, beverages and sweets purchased outside and consumed on the previous day. It's preferable to also assess what all has been the consumption pattern of these outside purchased foods over the last week. This probing will not be able to provide very accurate estimation of all the nutrients consumed, but can provide some idea about energy consumption and frequency of consumption of high fat, high sugar, high salt snacks and beverages in specific age groups. All this information come in very useful in providing appropriate nutrition counseling, especially in overnourished persons. Accurate measurement of physical activity of the individual is essential for prevention and management of both overnutrition and non-communicable disease. In the dual nutrition burden era, it is also important to undertake surveillance of levels of physical activity in groups of population using standardized protocols, so that impact of public health interventions aimed at increase in physical activity can be assessed. WHO had developed and validated Global Physical Activity Questionnaire using 24-hour dietary recall of physical activity, and this has been used in several countries as a part of NCD risk factor surveillance. The Global Physical Activity Questionnaire covers several components of physical activity such as intensity, duration, and frequency. The questionnaire assesses 3 domains in which physical activity is performed: occupational, transport-related, and physical activity during discretionary or leisure time. An Indian adaptation of Physical Activity Questionnaire, which provides information on domain and intensity of activity during the last 24 hours using a 24-hour recall method, which then gets summarized into what are the types of activities over the previous day, how this day differed from over the week activity, and how does activities during weekend differ from the weekdays, has been developed and has been in use in our institutions, and this has been shown in this slide. We will now move on to circumferential measurements using vernier tape. This picture is a typical digital weighing machine. It is lithium battery operated. The weight of the machine, it varies with the brand between 1.2 kg and 2.5 kg. These balances can weigh between 5 kg and 150 kg, and accuracy across all this entire wide area of kilogram is supposed to be plus or minus 100 grams. Certain precautions have to be taken in order to ensure accurate measurement of weight when digital balances are used. Digital weighing machines have to be checked for accuracy every day before use, because the batteries can become somewhat discharged, and this itself can cause errors in payment. They should be always stored in a cool, dust-free and moisture-free areas so that there is no moisture on the batteries, which could also hinder accurate weighment. Digital balances should never be stacked one on the top of the other, because any weight on the top of the balance triggers on the battery, and once the battery is on and continues to be on because of the pressure on the balance, these thin wire gauge, which is the essential structure which provides us accurate assessment of weight, can become hot and progressively elongated and lose its accuracy. So, digital balances should always be kept the way we keep books on a rack, vertically. Always remove the battery when you are not going to use the balance for a few days, and store it safely in a dry Ziploc bag. If the balance shows there is a low battery or it does not switch on, check the battery first. Wipe it, dust the small area in which the battery lies. Put it back and now switch on the balance. If it comes on and works normally, go ahead and undertake weighing. If there is any problem, change the battery, then undertake test for accuracy of the balance, and once it has been shown to be accurate, start measuring adults or children. Weighing children or adults in their homes has become extremely easy and comfortable with the use of digital balances. Keep the balance on the level ground. Step on it to switch on the battery. Tell the person clearly he or she should stand straight on the digital balance. Check for compliance, and if they are not standing straight, tell them how to do so. Do not push or pull the person who is standing on the balance, because this creates a problem both for the balance and for the person who is getting weight. In this picture, you can clearly see a breastfeeding mother, a pregnant woman, and a child standing straight on a digital balance in their own home settings by themselves. First, let us look at the infants. Weigh the mother when she is carrying the infant. Their combined weight in this case is 59.3 kilos. Weigh the mother alone. Her weight is 54.2 kilos. Therefore, the infant's weight is 5.1 kilo. We will now move on to circumferential measurements using vernier tape. The slide shows you a typical infantometer with a foldable head plate, the broad base on which baby's back rests, the foldable foot plate, tape for measuring baby's length, and a closed central panel attached to the foot plate which can be drawn out. In this slide, you can see an infant being measured, head held vertical against the head plate by the mother. You can see how gently she is holding the child and how comfortably the child is sleeping on the infantometer. The knees has been straightened and the foot positioned by the nutritionist vertically against the foot plate. The length of the baby is 63 centimeters, both in the test and in the standard infantometer. This is a picture of a wall mounted stature meter. The instrument specification is reverse wound stainless steel tape is put inside the plastic case between the horizontal and vertical arms of the instrument. The vertical arm fixes the stature meter to the wall. The horizontal arm rests on the head of the person being measured. The tape length is 2 meters. Instrument accuracy is 0.1 centimeters. Accuracy of the tape is assessed by comparing with standard steel tapes certified by Department of Weights and Measures. Accuracy of the stature meters in measuring height of individuals is tested against a standard stature meter. Another problem with positioning of the person for height measurement, especially children who are getting measured at home, is the tendency of some investigators to be in a hurry, thereby pushing and pulling the child to stand in the right posture against the wall. This should never be done because children do not like pushing and pulling and will inevitably respond either by slouching or by becoming stiff. Measurement of height with either of these will lead to errors. Persuade the child to stand at ease against the wall. The child here is standing straight. His heel, knees, buttock, back, shoulder and back of head are all touching the wall. Head is touching, held in Frankfurt plane, and the horizontal limb of the stature meter is resting gently on the top of child's head. Positioning of persons for height measurement is always a subject of debate. Can you really do it so? Will they really stand? Are questions that are commonly asked. And very often it is said, no, it may be possible under research circumstances, but certainly not possible under home conditions. Here is a pregnant woman who is getting measured in her own home. The advantage that we found was, in her house the wall was tiled, and therefore we had horizontal and vertical lines across against which we could compare how well and how straight she is standing. You can clearly see from her elbows, shoulder, chin, just above eyes and just above head. She is standing absolutely straight, looking straight ahead with a head held in Francis plane. The horizontal limb of the stature meter is resting on the top of her head, and her height is 146. We will now move on to circumferential measurements using vernier tape. Usually, circumferential measurements are taken using a non-stretch tape. Addition of a vernier scale to a non-stretch tape adds to the accuracy and also to the ease of circumferential measurements. Accuracy is the major issue when you are measuring mid-upper arm circumference in children. Ease of circumferential measurements is the important issue when we are trying to measure waist and hip circumference in women. How do you prepare the vernier scale? Attachment to the non-stretch tape. Take a thin glossy card. The type that is used for printing invitations is ideal for this purpose. Cut out segments which have a length of 12 centimeters and a width of 3 centimeters. Leave about 1.5 or even 2 centimeters on the left side. Then draw a line and put the centimeter tape, the non-stretch tape that we are going to use for measuring circumferential measurement, in the middle of the strip. Divide 9 centimeters on the tape into 10 divisions of 0.9 centimeters each on the card. Label these 10 divisions as 0 to 10 on the card. Hold the left end of the vernier scale with the right thumb and forefinger. Hold the right end of the vernier scale with the non-stretch tape stretched over the middle of it. Read the measurement at the 0 marking of the vernier scale. In this person, the mid-upper arm circumference is 23 centimeters. For measurement of waist circumference, people can continue to wear thin clothes as they wear in summer. The person who is measuring should stand in front of the person who is being measured. Person measured should stand straight with weight evenly distributed on both the feet. How do we identify the weight? The most pragmatic and feasible method is to say waist is the smallest circumference in the trunk between costal margin and iliac crest. At this smallest circumference, wind the tape horizontally. The tape should not have any obliquity. Check that the tape is wound snugly around the waist, and at the same time ensure that it does not compress soft tissue. Hip circumference can also be measured over thin clothes worn in summer, but should be avoided whenever thicker clothes are worn, as in winter time. Person measuring hip circumference should stand on one side of the person being measured so that they could look both in the front and in the back of the person being measured simultaneously. The person being measured should stand straight with the weight evenly distributed on both the feet. Hip is identified as the largest circumference in the hip region. The tape should be wound horizontally. There should not be any obliquity. This may present major problems if we are measuring obese people, where a fold of abdomen often falls in front of the pubic bone. The tape should be wound snugly around the hip but should not compress the soft tissues. Measurement of fat mass and its distribution has become very important in the dual nutrition burden era. The first step in measuring fat pole thickness is to check the specification or the caliper that is being made available for measurement. Ideally, the caliper dial graduation should be 0.2 mm. The range of measurement should be between 0 and 80 theoretically, but on practical terms it should be able to measure accurately fat pole thickness between 4 and 40 mm. The measuring pressure is the crucial single key for accuracy of measurement. It is 10 grams per millimeter. Accuracy rating for this instrument should be about 99%, and repeatability in the hands of trained, accurate people who have been used to measuring fat pole thickness is 0.2. In this, you can see clearly the difference in mid-upper arm fat pole triceps measurement in a thin person and in a person who is overweight. The amount of pressure exerted and ease of measurement and the pain inflicted are all more in the person who is more adult. In the last 2 decades, fat mass estimation by bioelectrical impedance analysis has been widely used. All commercial models of the machine have inbuilt mechanisms which measure bioelectrical impedance and compute and display body composition measurements on the screen. This method has become popular for estimating body fat because equipment is relatively inexpensive, portable and easy to use. But it is not the gold standard method for estimation of body fat. Consumption of water, dehydration or even moderate physical activity can all lead to inaccuracy in body fat estimation using BIA. The newer 8 electrode machine can be used by well-trained personnel who are aware of the precautions to be taken, in aware persons who have been informed and have taken the precautions to assess body fat and its distribution in individuals, and to monitor changes in body fat over time in an individual who ensure that comparable conditions are maintained between visits. Here we are showing you a newer version of BAA machine wherein one person is programming and other person is reading the screen for her own measurements. The newer versions have a platform with 4 electrodes on which the person can stand very comfortably, 2 handheld electrodes, a small keyboard which can be used to choose the required measurement, and a small screen which displays the measurements. Measurements can be printed by connecting the machine to a printer. In this slide we are showing you fat mass estimation by bioelectrical impedance analysis. The subject is standing on the 4 electrodes, holding the 2 handheld electrodes, and the machine has been programmed to measure body fat. Her body weight is 38.8 kg body fat is 26.3% and fat mass is 10.2 kg. If we then look at segmental fat distribution, truncal fat is 25.4, left arm fat 23%, right arm fat 21.3%, left leg 28.4, right leg 28.4. Clearly, the work-related lesser fat in the right arm is discernible. We will now sum up and draw some conclusion about assessment of nutritional status in the dual nutrition learning era. Data from national surveys across all age groups. From the national surveys undertaken in the period 2013 to 15, using BMI for assessment of nutritional status in all age groups, showed that prevalence of undernutrition was lowest in preschool children. Prevalence of undernutrition was higher in school-age children and young adults, especially those living in poorly performing AHS states. Overnutrition rates are also lowest in preschool children and show a progressive increase with increasing age. However, we should not ever lose sight of the fact that majority of Indians are normally nourished if BMI is used as the indicator for assessment of nutritional status. By BMI, nearly 80% of our children are normally nourished. We have programs to prevent under and overnutrition in preschool and school-age children. Majority of Indian adults are normally nourished. Nutrition and health professionals and aware population can strive to combat undernutrition and to prevent projected rise in overnutrition and non-communicable diseases through effective implementation of existing programs. If they all strive together, they can add years to life, and that year will be normal and healthy, good quality life. Programs to combat dual nutrition burden should consist of two major components. One is assessment of nutritional status, screened by anthropometry to detect under and overnutrition and adequacy. Second, assess dietary intake and physical activity. Based on the findings, undertake effective management of dual nutrition and health burden. Provide appropriate nutrition education and care, monitor for improvement, assess health problems, provide appropriate affordable health care. Interventions span the spectrum from public health measures aimed at reducing the risk of under and overnutrition in entire population, screening of vulnerable segments for early detection and effective care of individuals with nutrition and related health problems, and management of those detected with problems.
As I said in the beginning, India is currently in the midst of socio-economic, demographic, lifestyle, nutritional and health transitions. Undernutrition and its health consequences and poor maternal and child health indices are still major public health problems. Most of these health problems are symptomatic and acute. They can readily be treated and the person becomes absolutely normal after treatment. Overnutrition and associated non-communicable diseases are also now emerging as major public health problems. Most of the non-communicable diseases do not have symptoms in the initial phases. Patients seek care with symptoms mostly when complications set in. NCD management requires not only major lifestyle modification but also lifelong medication. Assessment of nutritional status is an important component of both public health interventions and care of the individual seeking health care. Ideally, nutritional assessment should be carried out periodically in all individuals and more often in vulnerable segments of population such as children, adolescent, pregnant, lactating women and elderly citizens. Neither nutrition nor health services or for that matter our population are geared for such routine periodic assessment, appropriate counseling for early detection and effective management of nutritional deficiencies and excesses before clinical problems arise. However, assessment of nutritional status should be carried out as and when there is an opportunity. What is the opportunity? When any person seeks health or nutrition care or community-based large-scale nutrition surveys are being undertaken. Once the assessment is done, appropriate advice should be given depending upon their nutritional status. The normally nourished person should be encouraged to continue their current lifestyles and provided support for continued normal nutrition and health status. Those who are under or overnourished and are at the risk of health problems should be provided with appropriate nutrition and physical activity counseling. If required, nutritional supplements may have to be given. All of them require monitoring for compliance and improvement in nutritional status. Those with illness, we have to identify their nutritional problems, provide appropriate health and nutrition therapy to restore normal health and nutritional status. Subsequently, they also should be monitored for their health and nutritional status. Nutritionists and physicians have to play a critical role in combating dual nutrition burden and disease burden by appropriate nutrition and lifestyle counseling and nutrition and health care. Promoting synergy between health and nutrition services will enable the country to achieve rapid improvement in health and nutritional status.